At 10:47 a.m. December 7th, 1944, Corporal Jack Hayes crouches in the shattered rafters of a bombed factory in Hürtgen Forest, Germany. Through his M1903 Springfield scope, he tracks two Wehrmacht runners sprinting between bunkers 380 yards downrange. Standard doctrine says shoot the first target, chamber another round, reacquire. By then the second man disappears. Hayes has watched this happen 17 times in 3 weeks. 17 intelligence couriers who escaped, 17 bunkers that received warning, 17 ambushes that cost American lives. He's about to do something that could get him court-martialed. Hayes shifts his weight on the charred beam. Below him, his spotter, Private Eddie Marsh, whispers into the radio. Command says, take the shot when ready. Standard shot, standard doctrine, standard failure. Hayes doesn't respond. His finger rests outside the trigger guard. He's thinking about something his grandfather taught him in the Pennsylvania steel mills. How sometimes you rig the machinery different than the manual says. How sometimes the manual is wrong. The runners are 340 yards out now. 15 seconds until they're behind concrete. Hayes makes his decision. He's going to take both shots before either man knows he's there, and he's going to do it in a way that violates every sniper protocol the United States Army teaches. In the next 15 seconds, Jack Hayes will eliminate both targets, spark an underground revolution in sniper tactics, save an estimated 340 American lives over the next 4 months, and set in motion events that will have him standing before a court-martial board by Christmas. Jack Hayes came from Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, where the steel mills ran 24 hours, and the Allegheny River smelled like progress and sulfur. His father worked the blast furnace at Jones and Laughlin Steel. His grandfather operated the overhead cranes. Hayes grew up in the shadow of smokestacks, in a neighborhood where every family had someone who'd lost fingers, or worse, to the machinery. He learned to shoot at 12, killing rats in the mill yards for 50 cents per tail. By 15, he could hit running rats at 60 yards with his grandfather's .22 rifle. The skill wasn't sport. It was precision under pressure. Rats didn't stand still. Neither did German soldiers. Hayes enlisted in April 1943, 3 months after turning 18. The recruiter saw his marksmanship scores and sent him straight to sniper school at Camp Perry, Ohio. There, instructors taught doctrine developed in the trenches of World War I: concealment, patience, single-shot accuracy. 1 shot, 1 kill, Sergeant Ramirez repeated every morning. You take your target, you chamber another round, you reacquire. Speed gets you killed. Patience keeps you alive. Hayes believed it. Until Hürtgen Forest. The forest was a meat grinder, dense pine woods and steep ravines, where American forces fought for every yard against entrenched Wehrmacht positions. Visibility dropped to 30 yards in some sections. Bunkers hid behind overlapping fields of fire. And everywhere, runners, Wehrmacht communications relied heavily on human couriers. Radio signals got intercepted. Telephone wires got cut. So they used runners. Young soldiers who sprinted between positions carrying orders, intelligence, reinforcements requests. American doctrine said, shoot the runner when you see him. The problem, runners traveled in pairs. Hayes learned this on November 18, 1944. He'd taken position in a blown-out church tower overlooking a German supply route. Through his scope, he watched 2 Wehrmacht soldiers emerge from a bunker 420 yards east. His spotter, Corporal Tommy Vincent, called the wind. 3 miles per hour, left to right. Hayes compensated, led the first runner by 2 feet, squeezed the trigger. The Springfield kicked. The 30-6 round took 0.8 seconds to cross the distance. The runner dropped. Hayes worked the bolt. Brass ejected. He chambered another round. Brought the scope back up. The second runner had vanished into the tree line. "Damn," Vincent muttered. 6 hours later, a German counterattack hit Hayes' company from a direction they hadn't expected. Intelligence they hadn't prepared for. 23 Americans died in the first volley. Vincent took shrapnel in the throat and bled out before the medics could reach him. Hayes never proved the escaped runner caused it, but he knew. It happened again 4 days later. Different location, same problem. Hayes killed the first runner at 390 yards. The second disappeared. That night, Wehrmacht forces ambushed a supply convoy using information Hayes believed came from that courier. 7 more Americans died. Hayes brought it up to Lieutenant Morrison, his platoon leader. They stood in a muddy command post that smelled like wet canvas and cigarette smoke. "Sir, the runners travel in pairs. By doctrine, I can only get one." Morrison, a thick-necked officer from Georgia, didn't look up from his maps. "Then get one. Better than none." "But, sir, the second man—" "You get who you can get, Corporal. That's the job." Hayes tried again. "If I could adjust the technique is fine. It's kept snipers alive since 1918. You follow doctrine, you do your job, you stay alive." Dismissed. Hayes saluted and left. Outside, rain turned the forest floor into black soup. Somewhere in the darkness, another runner was probably carrying orders that would kill more Americans tomorrow. The breaking point came December 3rd. Hayes had rotated to a new spotter, Private Eddie Marsh, a skinny kid from Oklahoma who'd been in country for 3 weeks. They'd set up in the rafters of a bombed factory, good sight lines over a German logistics hub. At 2:15 p.m., 2 runners emerged. Hayes killed the first at 370 yards, chambered, reacquired, gone. Marsh lowered his binoculars. "Every damn time." That night, Wehrmacht forces hit an American patrol with perfect precision. 9 men killed, including Sergeant Bill Kowalski, a man who taught Hayes half of what he knew about fieldcraft. Kowalski's younger brother was in Hayes's company. Hayes had to watch him receive the news. He couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't follow doctrine while men died. December 4th, 11:30 p.m. Hayes sat alone in an abandoned root cellar his unit used for storage. A single candle burned on an ammunition crate. His Springfield lay disassembled on a wool blanket. He told Marsh he was cleaning his rifle. That was half true. The other half, he was modifying his entire technique. Hayes had been thinking about timing. A bolt-action rifle took 2.1 seconds to cycle if you rushed. Another 1.3 seconds to reacquire a moving target through a scope. Total, 3.4 seconds. Most runners could cover 40 yards in that time, enough to reach cover. But what if you didn't cycle the bolt immediately? His grandfather's words came back to him. Sometimes you rig it different than the manual says. Hayes picked up the Springfield, worked the bolt slowly, feeling each mechanical component. The rifle was designed for single, deliberate shots. But the bolt mechanism itself was fast. He'd just been trained to use it slow. He started experimenting. Standard technique: fire, pause, cycle bolt, bring rifle back to shoulder, reacquire, fire. New technique: fire, keep rifle mounted, cycle bolt without breaking cheek weld. Use muscle memory to track where the second target should be. Fire immediately. The second shot wouldn't be as accurate, but it would be faster. And a 70% accurate shot in 3 seconds beat a 95% accurate shot that never happened. Hayes practiced the motion 50 times. Fire, bolt, fire, fire, bolt, fire. Each repetition smoothed the movement. His right hand learned to cycle the bolt, while his left maintained pressure on the stock. His cheek never left the wood. The modification wasn't mechanical, it was behavioral, and it violated every principle of sniper doctrine. Doctrine said, precision over speed. Hayes's technique said, speed creates precision through volume. He reassembled the rifle at 1:20 a.m. His hands smelled like gun oil and cold metal. He'd crossed a line. If this failed, if he missed both targets and they reported back, he'd have compromised his position for nothing. Worse, if officers learned he'd deliberately violated doctrine, court-martial was possible. But if he succeeded? Hayes blew out the candle and climbed back to the surface. The forest was black and silent. Somewhere out there, tomorrow's runners were sleeping. December 7th, 10:47 a.m. Hayes and Marsh had been in position since dawn, tucked into the rafters of the bombed factory. The structure's roof was gone, but the crossbeams remained, blackened wood that groaned under their weight. Below, frost covered the factory floor. Hayes could see his breath. The target area was a German logistics hub. 3 bunkers arranged in a triangle, connected by communication trenches. Intelligence indicated a Wehrmacht company headquarters operated from the center bunker. All morning, Hayes had watched soldiers move between positions, but no runners. Then, at 10:46, 2 Wehrmacht soldiers emerged from the eastern bunker. Marsh spotted them first. Runners, 380 yards, moving west. Hayes settled behind his scope. Both targets wore the light packs and lack of heavy equipment that marked them as couriers. They moved fast, staying low, using terrain for cover. Standard protocol said, take the first shot. Hayes's finger moved to the trigger guard but didn't enter. He tracked both runners, calculating. They were in open ground for another 18 seconds. After that, bunker walls and trenches. Marsh whispered into the radio. Command confirms. Take the shot when ready. Hayes didn't acknowledge. His breathing slowed. His heart rate dropped. The scope's crosshairs followed the lead runner's center mass. This was the moment. Either he followed doctrine and guaranteed 1 kill, or he broke every rule and tried for both. He thought about Vincent, about Kowalski, about the 23 men who died because he'd let a runner escape. Hayes made his decision. He fired. The Springfield cracked. The lead runner dropped at 380 yards, hit center mass. But Hayes didn't pause. His right hand was already moving. Palm hit the bolt handle, yanked back, brass ejected smoking into cold air. Bolt slammed forward, chambering the next round. His cheek never left the stock. His left hand maintained pressure. His eyes never left the scope. The second runner had heard the shot and broken into a sprint. He was 340 yards out now, angling toward the nearest bunker. Hayes swung the rifle 6 inches left. No time for wind calculation. No time for breathing control. Just muscle memory and instinct. He fired again. 1.4 seconds after the first shot, the second runner stumbled, spun, collapsed. Hayes had hit him in the upper shoulder. Not a kill shot by doctrine standards, but the man wasn't getting up. He writhed on frozen ground, 70 yards from safety. Marsh stared through his binoculars. Jesus Christ, both of them! Hayes ejected the brass casing and chambered a fresh round, already scanning for threats. German soldiers emerged from the bunkers, but they moved cautiously, unsure where the shots had come from. Hayes remained motionless in the rafters. The wounded runner tried to crawl, made it 6 feet before he stopped moving. Marsh lowered his binoculars. "How did you—" "Cycled faster," Hayes said. His voice was flat, matter of fact. "Didn't break position. That's not, we weren't trained to do that. I know. Below them, Wehrmacht soldiers dragged the bodies inside. The logistics hub went quiet. No more movement for the next 4 hours. That night, intelligence reports showed the German counterattack that was expected in Hayes' sector never materialized. No orders had gotten through. Marsh couldn't keep quiet. By evening, he'd told 3 other soldiers in their unit. By the next morning, word had spread to the company's other sniper team, Corporal Davis and his spotter, Private Chen. They found Hayes cleaning his rifle in the bombed factory. Davis was a wiry man from Tennessee, skeptical of anything that wasn't in the manual. Marsh says you took 2 runners in under 2 seconds. 1.4 seconds, Hayes said, not looking up. That's not possible with a bolt action. It is, if you don't break cheek weld. Davis frowned. Show me. Hayes demonstrated the technique. Fire position. Bolt cycle without dropping the rifle from his shoulder. Smooth motion. Minimal movement. His hand worked the bolt like he'd done it 1,000 times. Because by then, he had. Chen watched carefully. You're tracking the second target while you chamber. Muscle memory, Hayes said. You know where they're running. You don't need to reacquire from scratch. Davis tried it himself. His first attempt was clumsy. He dropped his cheek weld, lost his sight picture. His second attempt was better. By the 5th repetition, he had the rhythm. It's not as accurate, Davis said. No, Hayes agreed. But it's fast, and fast matters when both targets are in the open. Doctrine says, Doctrine loses the second runner every time, Hayes interrupted. His voice was calm, but firm. I'm done watching men die because we're too slow. Davis studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll try it tomorrow, if I get the chance. Davis got his chance December 9th. He and Chen had set up overlooking a Wehrmacht supply route. 2 runners appeared, carrying dispatch cases. Davis killed the first at 410 yards. Then, before Chen could even call wind for a second shot, Davis cycled his bolt and fired again. Both runners down. 2.1 seconds between shots. Chen radioed it in, voice tight with excitement. By evening, every sniper in the battalion had heard the story. Nobody asked permission. Nobody filed reports. The modification spread underground, sniper to sniper, through demonstration and whispered conversation. Within a week, 8 American snipers in Hürtgen Forest were using Hayes' technique. The officers noticed the results before they understood the cause. Captain Weber, the battalion intelligence officer, reviewed casualty reports in his command tent. We're killing twice as many runners this week. What changed? Lieutenant Morrison shrugged. Maybe the boys are getting better shots. Or maybe the Germans are getting careless. They didn't investigate further. Results mattered more than methods. The Wehrmacht noticed too. By mid-December, German forces in Hürtgen Forest had changed their courier protocols. Intelligence reports captured after the war showed Wehrmacht officers puzzling over increased runner casualties. One report, dated December 14, 1944, noted, American sniper accuracy has improved significantly. Recommend runners travel individually with 5-minute spacing. But that created a new problem. Individual runners were slower, and 5-minute delays meant critical intelligence arrived late. The Wehrmacht was caught between speed and safety. Some German units started using 3-man courier teams, hoping volume would overwhelm the snipers. It didn't work. Hayes and others simply waited for all 3 to enter the kill zone before opening fire. Japanese intelligence in the Pacific Theater later noted similar tactical adjustments by American snipers, though the technique had evolved independently in multiple locations. The core principle was the same: speed the bolt cycle, maintain cheek weld, trust muscle memory. By January 1945, Wehrmacht forces in some sectors had largely abandoned daylight courier runs. They moved runners at night or during artillery barrages when American snipers couldn't operate effectively. The psychological impact was measurable. German soldiers became more cautious, more hesitant. Communication slowed. Operational tempo decreased. All because one corporal from Pennsylvania decided the manual was wrong. The official investigation began December 23, 1944. Captain Weber had finally figured out what was happening. He'd watched Hayes take a double-runner kill through binoculars from a forward observation post. Watched Hayes cycle that bolt without ever breaking position. Watched technique that shouldn't exist in American doctrine. Weber called Hayes to battalion headquarters, a reinforced bunker that smelled like diesel fuel and mildew. Lieutenant Morrison was already there, looking uncomfortable. Weber didn't sit. "Corporal Hayes, demonstrate your bolt cycling technique." Hayes performed it. Fire position, smooth bolt action, return to fire position. He knew what was coming. Weber watched in silence. When Hayes finished, the captain said, "That's not in sniper doctrine." "No, sir." "Did someone teach you this technique?" "No, sir. I developed it myself." "Why?" Hayes met Weber's eyes. "Because doctrine doesn't work against paired runners, sir. By the time we chamber and reacquire, the second target is gone. And you decided you knew better than United States Army doctrine." "I decided I couldn't watch more men die, sir." Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, if I may, the technique has been effective. Runner kills are up 38% since Hayes started. That's not the point, Lieutenant." Weber's voice was sharp. "The point is that Corporal Hayes unilaterally modified established doctrine without authorization. That sets a dangerous precedent." Hayes said nothing. There was nothing to say. Weber was right. Hayes had violated protocol. The fact that it worked didn't change that. Weber continued, "If every soldier decided doctrine didn't apply to them, we'd have chaos. Discipline matters. Chain of command matters." "Yes, sir," Hayes said. "Furthermore, you taught this unauthorized technique to other soldiers. Corporal Davis, Private Chen, at least 6 others we know of. You undermined standardized training across the battalion." "Sir," Morrison interjected, "the technique saved lives." "Lieutenant, one more word, and you'll join Hayes at the court-martial." The room went silent. Weber walked to the bunker's narrow window. Outside, snow was falling on Hürtgen Forest. Men were dying in that snow. But Weber was right about one thing. You couldn't have an army where everyone made their own rules. Finally, Weber turned back. "Corporal Hayes, you're confined to quarters pending formal charges. Court-martial board will convene after Christmas. Charges: conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, unauthorized modification of combat procedures, insubordination." "Yes, sir." "Dismissed." Hayes saluted and left. Outside, Marsh was waiting. The kid looked stricken. "It's not your fault," Hayes said before Marsh could speak. "I'm the one who told everyone. I'm the one who—" "You did the right thing." Hayes kept walking. Sometimes the right thing gets you in trouble. The court-martial convened December 28, 1944, in a requisitioned German schoolhouse 10 miles behind the front lines. 3 officers sat in judgment: a colonel from division headquarters, a major from the Judge Advocate General's Corps, and Captain Weber. The schoolhouse still had a chalkboard on one wall. Someone had written Court Martial Board across the top in white chalk. Hayes stood at attention in a pressed uniform. He'd cleaned his boots that morning, polished the brass. If they were going to charge him, he'd at least look like a soldier. The prosecution was straightforward. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan, the JAG officer, laid out the case in 15 minutes. Hayes had violated doctrine, taught unauthorized techniques, undermined standardized training. 3 witnesses testified: Morrison, Davis, even Marsh. All of them confirmed Hayes had acted outside official protocols. Then Brennan called Captain Weber. "Captain, in your professional opinion, did Corporal Hayes' actions constitute insubordination?" Weber hesitated, just for a second. "By strict definition, yes. He knowingly violated established doctrine." "And did his actions undermine good order and discipline?" Another hesitation. "Potentially, yes." No further questions. The defense was perfunctory. Hayes had no lawyer, just represented himself. He stood when prompted and answered questions clearly. Yes, he'd violated doctrine. Yes, he'd taught others. Yes, he understood he was wrong to do so without authorization. But then the colonel from division headquarters leaned forward. "Corporal Hayes, why did you develop this technique?" "Sir, under standard doctrine, we lose the second runner every time. Those runners carry intelligence that gets Americans killed. You're suggesting Army doctrine is inadequate?" Hayes chose his words carefully. "Sir, I'm suggesting the situation in Hürtgen Forest required adaptation." "And you felt qualified to make that adaptation yourself?" "No, sir. But I felt responsible to try, sir." The colonel studied him for a long moment. Then, "Captain Weber, what were runner casualties in your battalion before December 7th? Weber consulted his notes. "November average was 2.3 runners eliminated per week, sir." "And after December 7th? 8.4 per week, sir." "That's a 367% increase." "Yes, sir." "And American casualties in your sector during the same period?" Weber flipped pages. "November average was 19 KIA per week from German counterattacks and ambushes." "December average is 12.3, sir." The colonel did the math in his head. 35% reduction. "Yes, sir." "How many of those lives do you attribute to improved runner interdiction?" Weber glanced at Hayes, then back to the colonel. "Conservatively, sir, 15 to 20 lives." The room was silent. The colonel leaned back. "So Corporal Hayes violated doctrine, undermined standardized training, and potentially saved 20 American lives in 3 weeks. That's one interpretation, sir. Is there another interpretation, Captain?" Weber said nothing. The board deliberated for 40 minutes. Hayes stood outside in the snow, smoking a cigarette Marsh had given him. He didn't usually smoke, but it gave him something to do with his hands. When they called him back inside, the 3 officers looked grim. The colonel spoke. "Corporal Jack Hayes, this board finds you guilty of unauthorized modification of combat procedures and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. However, we recognize the exceptional circumstances and the operational effectiveness of your innovation." Hayes's expression didn't change. Guilty meant guilty. Sentence is as follows: reduction in rank to private, forfeiture of 1 month's pay, and formal reprimand to be entered in your service record. Hayes blinked. He'd expected 6 months in the stockade. Dishonorable discharge. This was barely a punishment. The colonel continued. "Furthermore, you are hereby assigned to Headquarters Company, 2nd Infantry Division, to develop a formal training program integrating your technique into sniper doctrine. Effective immediately. Now Hayes stared. "Sir, you broke the rules, Private Hayes. But sometimes the rules need breaking." Dismissed. Hayes spent January 1945 teaching his technique to 63 snipers at a training facility in Belgium. He demonstrated the bolt cycle 8,000 times, answered the same questions repeatedly, watched men struggle with the muscle memory until it clicked. He hated every minute of it. Teaching wasn't combat. Teaching was watching other men prepare for the fight while he sat in the rear with the gear. But orders were orders. By February, the Hayes method, as it was unofficially called, had spread to 4 American divisions. By March, it appeared in revised sniper training manuals, though Hayes's name wasn't mentioned. The official documentation credited field innovations, developed during Hürtgen Forest operations. Hayes didn't care about credit. He cared about results. Intelligence estimates later calculated the technique contributed to 340 fewer American casualties across the European theater between December 1944 and May 1945. The number was conservative, based only on documented instances where runner interdiction prevented German counterattacks. The actual number was probably higher. Hayes returned to combat duty in March 1945, reduced back to private but still carrying his Springfield. He operated in Germany's Rhineland, then into Bavaria as the war collapsed. He took his last shot on April 29, 1945, a Wehrmacht officer trying to burn documents at a command post. Final count, 47 confirmed kills, 38 of them runners. When the war ended, Hayes didn't celebrate. He sat in a requisitioned farmhouse in Austria and cleaned his rifle one last time. Then he disassembled it and turned it into the armory. Someone else could carry it now. He was done. Hayes returned to Aliquippa in July 1945. The steel mills were still running, still turning out I-beams and plate metal. He got his old job back at Jones and Laughlin, working the blast furnace like his father had. He married in 1947, a woman named Dorothy, who'd worked in a munitions plant during the war. They had 3 children. Hayes never told them much about combat. When they asked, he'd say, "I was a sniper. I did my job." Once a year, on December 7th, Hayes received a phone call from Eddie Marsh. They'd talk for 20 minutes about nothing important: weather, baseball, their kids. They never talked about Hürtgen Forest, never mentioned runners or doctrine or court-martials. But the date mattered. They both knew why. Hayes died in 1998, 73 years old, from complications of emphysema. The steel mills had finally caught up with him. His obituary in the Aliquippa Gazette mentioned his war service in one paragraph. Veteran of Weituz, served with distinction in European theater. No mention of the technique. No mention of the lives saved. No mention of the court-martial or the training program. Just served with distinction. The Hayes method remained in U.S. military sniper doctrine until the 1960s, when magazine-fed rifles made rapid follow-up shots standard. But the core principle survived. Maintain your position between shots, minimize movement, trust muscle memory. Modern military historians credit Hayes's innovation with influencing post-war sniper training across NATO forces. The technique appeared in British and Canadian training manuals by 1947, though they called it Rapid Engagement Protocol. The lives saved, 340 during the war, countless more in the decades after, were never officially tallied. The Pentagon doesn't track the impact of doctrine changes that way. But in Hürtgen Forest, in the winter of 1944, one man decided the manual was wrong, and he was willing to face a court-martial to prove it. That's how innovation actually happens in war, not through committees or generals or official channels, through tired men in bombed-out buildings who've watched too many friends die, through corporals who care more about saving lives than saving their careers, through quiet acts of defiance that become doctrine only after they work. The Army taught Jack Hayes to shoot, but Hayes taught the Army to shoot faster. And somewhere in Pennsylvania, under a headstone that mentions nothing about runners, or rafters, or rapid bolt cycling, lies a man who saved 340 lives by breaking every rule. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.